The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, staring at the little red needle on my water meter spinning like it was in a race against itself. I hadn't run the dishwasher. I hadn't touched the shower. My sprinklers weren't even programmed to run until Saturday. But that needle was flying, and the longer I watched it, the more money I could practically hear draining out of my bank account. By the time I followed the pipe back along the property line, the sound of gurgling hoses and a faint mist rising in the morning air led me straight to Karen's front yard, where 4 giant sprinklers were firing water across her lawn like she was trying to grow rice paddies in suburbia. That's when I realized my HOA-appointed compliance chair, otherwise known as Karen, had tapped into my water line. The same Karen who left notices about my grass being half an inch too tall, the same one who scolded me for leaving my trash can out 3 minutes past collection. She had stolen my water, and not just a sip. Judging by the mudslide forming under her azaleas, she'd been stealing gallons, maybe days' worth. And here's the kicker. She waved at me from her porch, cup of coffee in hand, like this was just neighborly sharing. Like she was doing me a favor by using my water to perfect her emerald green lawn. I didn't yell. I didn't storm her porch. Instead, I asked calmly, "Karen, why is your hose hooked into my line?" She didn't blink. She said, "The HOA expects homeowners to keep their yards pristine. Since yours is usually average, I figured you wouldn't mind contributing to the neighborhood's curb appeal. You should be thanking me. Property values go up for everyone when the front lots shine." She actually said that. Like siphoning my utilities was some kind of community service project. And when I pointed at the mud pooling around her driveway, she had the audacity to sigh and tell me I should stop being selfish. That was the moment I knew 2 things. First, I was not going to let this go. Second, Karen had no idea what kind of long game she had just walked herself into. Over the next week, I documented everything. I took pictures of the hoses snaking from her yard into mine. I filmed the meter spinning with every gush of her sprinklers. I even recorded audio of her bragging to another HOA officer that she had solved her irrigation costs by getting creative. The smugness in her voice was almost as loud as the sprinklers themselves. But the more I gathered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about a few gallons of water. The county was in the middle of a drought warning. Restrictions had gone into effect, and Karen, by funneling my water for her fantasy golf course lawn, was about to drag the entire neighborhood into a mess none of them saw coming. The escalation started small. The HOA sent out notices threatening fines to anyone violating the water restrictions, fines that would escalate to legal action if ignored. Karen, of course, assumed her position on the board made her immune. She laughed off the first notice, tossed the second, and used the third to line her recycling bin. Meanwhile, I watched my utility bills climb, each one a neon sign flashing proof of her theft. And every time I brought it up, she twisted the narrative, telling neighbors I was hoarding resources and not contributing to community standards. It was like watching a fox steal chickens while accusing the farmer of being greedy. The real turning point came when the county inspectors started making rounds. They weren't subtle about it. White trucks, clipboards, cameras snapping pictures of lawns that looked suspiciously lush during a drought. Karen's yard, greener than a golf course, stuck out like a neon sign in the desert. She tried to explain it away as a secret fertilizer mix, and even staged photos of herself with a watering can, pretending to nurture her flowers by hand. But the inspectors weren't buying it. They knew someone was breaking the rules. They just didn't know who. Yet, that's when I realized the trap would close on its own. All I had to do was wait, keep my evidence neat and quiet, and let Karen keep digging her own muddy grave. And she did, every single morning, with the hiss of stolen water spraying across her lawn like a countdown clock only I could hear. What she didn't know, what nobody in the neighborhood knew yet, was that when the county traced the source of her water, it wasn't just her reputation on the line. It was every house in the HOA, every shared system, every fine that would be divided across their fees. Karen wasn't just stealing from me. She was dooming them all. And that's where I'll pause, because if you've ever lived next to a Karen, you know this is only the beginning. She thought she could bully, steal, and manipulate without consequences. But by the time this story was over, Karen's little theft would unravel into the kind of disaster that left the whole neighborhood furious, the HOA bankrupt, and her lawn nothing but scorched earth. The next time I caught Karen stealing my water, it wasn't dawn. It was 10 o'clock at night, and I was standing in the shadows by my garage with a flashlight off and my phone camera rolling. The air was heavy with the kind of silence that only suburban neighborhoods know after dark. Dog barks far away, sprinklers clicking somewhere in the distance, a car door shutting 2 streets over. Then came the telltale sound, the hiss and gurgle of water rushing where it shouldn't. I stepped around the hedge and there she was, crouched in yoga pants and a neon headlamp, wrestling with a hose connection that fed straight from my spigot into her elaborate sprinkler system. She had gloves on like she was committing a heist, but the confidence with which she worked told me she didn't consider it theft. To her, this was maintenance. She caught me watching and didn't even flinch. Instead, she stood up, brushed off her hands and said, "Don't look so dramatic. You weren't using it anyway." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Karen didn't see neighbors as equals. She saw us as resources. Our fences, our property lines, our utilities. None of it mattered if it conflicted with her vision of how the neighborhood should look. And in her mind, she was the steward of that vision. So when I asked her how long she'd been doing this, she admitted, almost proudly, since last spring. You didn't even notice until now, so what's the harm? The harm, of course, was about to cost thousands. I went back inside and pulled up my bills from the past year. The spikes lined up perfectly with when her lawn had gone from patchy brown to golf course green. I crunched the numbers. She had siphoned more than 35,000 gallons. That was enough to fill an average swimming pool, and during a drought, no less. Worse, the county had already announced they'd be raising rates for excessive users and publicly listing addresses of violators. Karen wasn't on the radar yet because she wasn't paying for it. I was. Which meant when the county finally matched the addresses to the meter readings, the blame would land squarely on me. I spent the next week tightening the net. I bought a trail camera, camouflaged it near the spigot, and captured high-definition video of her sneaking over, sometimes in slippers, sometimes in broad daylight, dragging hoses across the line like a kid sneaking candy. The footage was damning. But here's the thing. It wasn't enough to humiliate her in front of the HOA. It wasn't enough to confront her in front of neighbors. If I did that, she'd spin it. She'd cry about being misunderstood, accuse me of harassment, maybe even slap me with a counter-complaint for defamation. I'd seen her do it before when another neighbor accused her of trespassing to clip hydrangeas. She twisted it into a community pruning initiative and walked away squeaky clean. So I needed leverage she couldn't wiggle out of. And that leverage arrived in the form of a thick, cream-colored envelope from the county water department. The notice said my property was now under review for excessive and suspicious consumption. They were launching an investigation, complete with fines that started at $5,000. They wanted explanations, receipts, evidence of compliance with drought regulations. If I couldn't prove otherwise, I'd be hit not just with fees but also with restrictions so severe I wouldn't even be able to run a garden hose. The day I got that letter, I sat on my porch and watched Karen strut down the street, clipboard in hand, barking at another neighbor about trash can violations. My blood boiled. She was stealing water from me while enforcing rules on others. The hypocrisy was almost artistic in its audacity. But instead of storming down to confront her, I smiled. Because the letter had given me exactly what I needed, a way to shift the spotlight. I gathered every scrap of evidence. Videos, photos, timestamps, meter readings. I drafted a detailed report, complete with a neat chart showing the spike in my bills. Then I attached the piece de resistance. A flash drive with video of Karen herself, in her headlamp and gloves, twisting my spigot open at night. I sealed it all in a manila envelope addressed not to the HOA, not to Karen, but to the county inspector handling the case. I figured if they were going to investigate, they should at least be investigating the right house. A week later, the inspector arrived in a white truck, parking right in front of Karen's manicured lawn. He stepped out with a clipboard, scanned the property, then walked straight to her door. I was on my porch pretending to sweep leaves, but really, I was listening to every word. Karen opened the door all smiles, probably expecting to schmooze her way through whatever questions he had. But the moment he mentioned unauthorized water line connections, her voice went sharp. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "I would never. I'm the compliance chair." She even pointed toward my house, claiming, "If anyone's cheating, it's him. He's been overwatering." The inspector didn't argue. He simply asked to see her backyard. She stalled, tried to wave him off, but eventually led him around. 15 minutes later, he came back out, holding one of her hoses. It was still damp, dripping onto the pavement. Karen followed behind, red in the face, insisting it was a misunderstanding. The inspector didn't look convinced. He told her the county would be following up with formal notices and potential fines. She turned to glare at me like I'd personally betrayed her. But here's where things took an unexpected twist. Instead of backing off, Karen doubled down. That evening, she called an emergency HOA meeting. By the next night, half the neighborhood was packed into the community clubhouse while she stood at the front, waving her clipboard like a sword. "We are under attack," she declared, "by neighbors who would rather see our community dry up than contribute to its beauty. Certain individuals," she glanced at me, "are making false accusations to deflect from their own violations. I propose we levy special assessments on households wasting water." It was bold, almost genius in its shamelessness. She was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against me before the county's findings could land. And for a moment it worked. People shifted in their seats, whispering, looking at me with suspicion. My yard wasn't as lush as hers, but I did have a vegetable garden. They probably wondered if I'd been sneaking water too. Karen knew how to weaponize perception. So I let her rant. I let her gather momentum. And then, when she finally asked if anyone had objections, I stood up. I pulled a small projector from my bag, set it on the table, and pressed play. The room fell silent as the grainy night footage flickered onto the wall. Karen, headlamp glowing, twisting my spigot, dragging hoses. Her voice could be heard clearly saying, "You weren't using it anyway." The gasps were audible. Karen froze, eyes wide. Someone in the back muttered, "Is that her?" Another neighbor hissed, "She's been stealing water?" The projector kept looping the clip, over and over, until she shouted to turn it off. But the damage was done. Her credibility was shattered in real time. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday evening, which meant most of the neighborhood had no excuse not to attend. Karen made sure of it. She plastered notices on mailboxes, sent out mass emails with subject lines like "Community Standards at Risk," and even cornered people on their lawns to whisper about how I was a danger to neighborhood unity. By the time I walked into the community clubhouse, the place was packed shoulder to shoulder, the kind of turnout usually reserved for summer barbecues or Christmas raffles. Only this wasn't festive, it was tense. Karen had set the stage for my public execution, and she was standing at the front in a tailored blazer like she was presiding over a courtroom. She opened the meeting with her usual smug confidence. "We are gathered tonight to address the misconduct of one homeowner who has chosen to slander and harass a board member." Her eyes locked on me with that trademark Karen stare, half condescension, half fury. "We cannot tolerate lies that damage the reputation of our community leadership." She tapped her clipboard for effect. "Our bylaws are clear about respect, compliance, and unity." The board sat beside her, for members who might as well have been cardboard cutouts. They nodded along, their expressions neutral but wary. Karen had them wrapped around her finger. After all, she chaired their committees, organized their fundraisers, and weaponized their bylaws with surgical precision. To them, siding against Karen wasn't just risky, it was political suicide. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I'm accused of slander," I said, standing at the podium. "But slander only applies if what I said wasn't true. So let's deal with the truth." I reached into my bag, pulled out a thick binder, and dropped it onto the podium with a satisfying thud. The sound echoed in the room, making a few people flinch. "This is a record of my water bills over the last year. Here are the spikes." I flipped open the binder, holding up color-coded charts for everyone to see. 35,000 gallons above my average use. "Do you think I'm running a water park back there?" A few chuckles broke the tension. Karen interrupted, "Those numbers prove nothing. He's probably wasting water, and now he's blaming me." I didn't even look at her. "And here," I continued, "is photographic evidence of a hose running directly from my spigot into Karen's irrigation system." I held up glossy prints like they were exhibits in a trial. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. And finally, I reached for the projector remote, clicking it on. The screen lit up with the now familiar footage. Karen in her headlamp twisting the spigot. The audio filled the room. "Don't look so dramatic. You weren't using it anyway." This time the reaction wasn't just gasp. It was outrage. Neighbors turned to glare at Karen, whispering angrily. Someone shouted, "That's theft." Another said, "She's the reason our bills are up." The board members shifted uncomfortably, caught between loyalty and undeniable evidence. Karen, true to form, didn't back down. "This is out of context," she shrieked. "I was borrowing it temporarily for the good of the neighborhood. He's twisting the narrative to make me look bad." Her face flushed crimson as she pointed at me. "You're all being manipulated by his theatrics." But her words didn't carry the same weight anymore. The spell was breaking. For the first time, people were seeing Karen not as the untouchable enforcer of HOA law, but as a hypocrite who had been stealing behind their back. Then the county inspector stood up from the back of the room. Nobody had noticed him slip in. He cleared his throat, holding a stack of papers. "My office received evidence from this homeowner." He gestured to me. "And we conducted our own follow-up inspection. What we found was clear. Illegal siphoning of water, ongoing for months in violation of drought restrictions. This entire neighborhood is now under review for penalties." The room erupted. Neighbors shouted, chairs scraped, people turned on each other with frantic questions. "Penalties? What kind of penalties? How much are we talking?" The inspector raised his voice to cut through the noise. "The fines could exceed $50,000, and unless the guilty party accepts full liability, those costs may be distributed across the HOA." The words hung in the air like a guillotine. $50,000. Spread across 60 households, that meant nearly 1,000 each. And suddenly every neighbor who'd once sided with Karen was staring daggers at her. She tried to laugh it off. "This is ridiculous. They can't possibly enforce that." But the inspector wasn't smiling. One man in the back stood up, fists clenched. "My wife and I are barely keeping up with mortgage payments. If you think we're paying $1,000 because you wanted a green lawn, you're insane." Others piled on. "We're not covering for you, Karen. You've been lording over us for years, and now you're stealing from us too?" The energy in the room shifted from suspicion of me to outright hostility toward her. Karen's mask cracked. Her voice went shrill, desperate. "You don't understand, I did this for us. For property values. Nobody wants to buy into a neighborhood with dying grass." But nobody was listening. Her greater good justification rang hollow when the math hit people's wallet. For the first time, Karen wasn't in control. She was cornered. The board tried to intervene, banging a gavel and calling for order, but it was useless. Neighbors were yelling over one another, demanding Karen's removal, demanding answers. And then someone asked the question that silenced the room. If she's been stealing water, what else has she been stealing? It was the perfect spark. Suddenly, people were remembering missing packages, mysterious HOA fee increases, questionable maintenance charges. Karen had positioned herself as the gatekeeper of the neighborhood for so long that nobody had dared question her. But now, with undeniable proof of theft, everything she had touched was up for scrutiny. I stayed quiet, watching it all unfold. I didn't need to add fuel to the fire. Karen was burning her own bridges faster than I ever could. She stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her, but the damage was irreversible. The next morning, the fallout began. Angry emails flooded the HOA mailing list, demanding her resignation. Neighbors stopped waving at her, stopped mowing their lawns in sync with her schedule, stopped caring about her endless memos. And when the county followed up with official fines, addressed directly to the HOA, the panic set in. Everyone knew exactly who to blame, but the system didn't care. It was collective liability unless Karen took full responsibility. The board tried to negotiate with her, urging her to sign an admission of guilt that would shift the financial burden solely onto her. But Karen refused. She claimed it was a witch hunt, that she wouldn't be scapegoated. Her pride wouldn't let her admit fault, even if it meant dragging 60 households into financial ruin. That's when the neighborhood turned truly hostile. People who had once tolerated her clipped comments and clipboard patrols now treated her like a pariah. Cars slowed as they passed her house, windows rolled down so drivers could shout, "Thief!" Someone spray-painted "water rat" on her mailbox. And yet, she still strutted around like she was untouchable, barking about bylaws and threatening lawsuit. Karen disappeared for 3 days after being voted out, which was unusual. Normally, she was a daily fixture, marching up and down the sidewalks, clipboard in hand, enforcing her imaginary kingdom. When her house sat dark for that stretch, blinds drawn, neighbors whispered she'd finally been humiliated into retreat. But I knew better. Karen wasn't the retreating type. She was the plotting type, the kind who would rather drag the whole world down than admit defeat. And when her porch light finally flickered back on the 4th night, the neighborhood braced itself. Her comeback began not with a bang, but with a letter. An official-looking packet slipped into every mailbox, stamped with bold lettering across the top. Mandatory Community Water Conservation Plan. At first glance, it sounded like the county had issued it, but the more you read, the more absurd it became. It wasn't from the county at all. It was from Karen. She had drafted her own emergency policy, claiming that in order to avoid further fines, all homeowners were required to reduce water consumption by 50%. And who would monitor compliance? Karen, of course. The rules were draconian. No lawn watering at all unless pre-approved. Car washing prohibited. Pool use limited to emergencies. Even outdoor hose bibs were to be locked, with keys kept at the HOA office. An office Karen no longer controlled but was trying to seize back through this policy. At the bottom, it threatened fines of $200 per violation, payable directly to a temporary neighborhood relief fund. Translation: Karen was attempting to invent her own tax system to funnel money straight into her pocket under the guise of saving the community. The audacity was impressive, even by Karen's standards. But what shocked me more was that a few neighbors, panicked by the looming county fines, actually went along with it. They padlocked their spigots, drained their kiddie pools, and sent compliance updates to Karen's email address. Fear, once again, was giving her traction. I wasn't about to let her pull the neighborhood back under her thumb. So I drafted my own letter, this one simple and factual. I attached the county inspector's official notice, highlighted the line stating responsibility lies with the offending household, and mailed copies to every home. The message was clear. Karen was the offender, Karen was liable, and Karen had no authority to invent fines. I figured that would shut her down. Instead, it lit a fuse. The following Saturday, I came home to find a bright orange sticker slapped across my garage door. Water abuser, shame on you. It looked official, complete with a mock seal that said, "Community Watch." My neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, pointing, whispering, some even shaking their heads at me. Karen was staging a public shaming campaign, and she was good at it. Within hours, 2 other houses had stickers too, both families who had spoken against her. She was branding dissenters as villains while recasting herself as the defender of the neighborhood. That night, I heard shouting across the street. One of my neighbors, a quiet guy named George, was tearing the sticker off his garage while Karen screamed at him from her driveway. "If you don't comply, you'll bankrupt us all," she shrieked, her voice carrying through the cul-de-sac. George yelled back, "You're the one who bankrupted us." A crowd gathered, and for the first time, the neighborhood teetered on the edge of open revolt. But Karen had another card up her sleeve. At the next HOA board meeting, one she was no longer entitled to attend, she stormed in anyway, clutching a thick stack of papers. She slammed them onto the table and declared, "I've contacted an attorney. If you don't enforce my plan, I'll sue the HOA for negligence." The board members froze. Lawsuits meant costs, and costs meant special assessment. Even the most anti-Karen among them paled at the thought. She was holding the threat of financial ruin over their heads, betting they'd cave rather than fight. I couldn't help myself. I stood up and asked, "Karen, do your attorney and your conscience know you siphoned 35,000 gallons of water from me? Do they know you're already liable for the fines?" She turned on me, eyes blazing. "This isn't about me anymore, it's about saving the neighborhood." It was a bold performance, and for a moment, I could see some board members wavering. Fear again. Karen was a master at exploiting it. But then the county inspector's follow-up report arrived like divine timing. The envelope was thick, the kind you know contains bad news, and the board president opened it in front of everyone. He read aloud, "Final determination of liability. Household at 214 Crescent Lane, Karen's address, is solely responsible for violation. Fine imposed $47, 200. The silence was delicious. Karen's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She stammered something about appeals and misinterpretations, but nobody was buying it. For the first time, the board had official, indisputable documentation. Karen couldn't spread the cost around. She was on the hook. But that didn't mean the neighborhood was safe. Because Karen's response to being cornered wasn't surrender, it was sabotage. Over the next week, strange things started happening. Sprinklers in multiple yards were mysteriously set to run overnight, soaking lawns until they flooded. Hoses were found unscrewed and left gushing inside yard. Water meters were tampered with, their covers pried open, their dials scratched. It was as if someone was trying to create the illusion that everyone was breaking the rules. And of course, Karen was the one discovering these infractions, parading around with her phone out, snapping pictures as evidence that the fines weren't really her fault. The county wasn't fooled, but the damage was real. Some neighbors got slapped with warnings simply because Karen had orchestrated enough chaos to trigger inspections. The neighborhood was unraveling under paranoia. People accused each other, friendships frayed, and property values, the very thing Karen claimed to protect, started to plummet. Realtors whispered about issues with the HOA, and a for sale sign sprouted on the corner house, the first of many to come. Through it all, I stayed quiet. I kept documenting, recording, waiting. Because I knew Karen's need for control was bottomless, and eventually, she'd go too far. And she did, one humid evening when I found her crouched by the main water line near the clubhouse, wrench in hand. She was trying to shut off the supply for the entire neighborhood, muttering to herself about teaching them all a lesson. I didn't confront her directly. Instead, I pulled out my phone and filmed her, clear as day, sabotaging the main line. By the next morning, half the neighborhood had no running water. People were furious. Children couldn't shower before school, toilets wouldn't flush, kitchens sat with dirty dishes stacked high. And when the utility company arrived to investigate, Karen came strutting out like she was the one who had caught the issue. But this time I was ready. I sent the video straight to the utility company, the HOA board, and the county inspector. Within hours, Karen's little stunt was exposed. The utility reps were livid, the inspector furious, the board humiliated. And the neighbors? They were done. Absolutely done. Spectacle of her downfall. The day it began, the sky was blistering blue, the kind of oppressive summer heat that makes everyone short-tempered and desperate for shade. Kids rode bikes lazily through the cul-de-sac, dogs panted on porches, and sprinklers, those few still legally allowed, clicked weakly against parched grass. Everyone was tense, waiting for the next piece of drama to drop. Nobody had to wait long. It started with a flyer. Not a polite HOA notice, not an official county letter, but a neon green sheet plastered on every door. Across the top in giant block letters, Emergency Community Meeting, Mandatory Attendance. The meeting, of course, was scheduled for that evening, at the clubhouse. The signature at the bottom, Karen, Acting Community Chair. She had no authority to call it, but that didn't matter. Karen thrived on audacity. By sunset, nearly every household showed up. Some came out of fear of more fines, others out of morbid curiosity. I went because I knew Karen wouldn't stop until she burned the last bridge, and I wanted to watch it happen. The clubhouse buzzed with restless energy, folding chairs scraping as people filed in. At the front stood Karen, dressed in a crisp white suit like she was running for office, a stack of papers in her hand. She launched into her speech without waiting for order. "Neighbors," she began, her voice carrying with the false confidence of someone teetering on the edge, "we are facing an existential crisis. The county wants to destroy us with fines. The board is weak. But I have a solution, a bold, collective solution." She slapped her papers onto the podium. "If we pool our resources, if each household contributes $2,000 to a community relief fund, we can pay the fines, rebuild our infrastructure, and restore our reputation. This fund will be managed by me, as acting treasurer." The room erupted. Shouts, laughter, outrage. Someone yelled, "You expect us to hand you more money after you stole thousands of gallons of water?" Another shouted, "This is extortion." Karen raised her hands, trying to command silence. "It's the only way. If we don't act together, the county will bankrupt us all." I stood up slowly, letting the noise simmer before speaking. "Karen," I said calmly, "you're asking for over $100,000 to pay fines you alone caused. And you want us to trust you with the money? The same person who siphoned my water, tampered with meters, and sabotaged the main line." My voice was steady, but the anger underneath was clear. She glared at me, lips trembling. "You think you're clever, don't you? Always undermining me, always painting me as the villain. But you don't see the big picture. Without me, this neighborhood collapses." And then came the twist nobody expected. Karen reached into her briefcase and pulled out a fat binder. "I have files," she declared, holding it aloft. "On all of you. Every violation, every late fee, every time you bent the rules. If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. The county will see just how corrupt this neighborhood really is." The room went silent, the air thick with disbelief. She had done it, kept dossiers on her neighbors, weaponizing every petty infraction into ammunition. It was equal parts terrifying and pathetic, the last gasp of a tyrant clinging to power. That's when George, the quiet neighbor Karen had screamed at weeks earlier, stood up. "Show them," he said. "Open the files. Let's see what you've got." Others joined in. "Yeah, let's see. Put it on the table." The pressure mounted, and Karen, in her arrogance, actually flipped the binder open. She started reading. Lot 16, left Christmas lights up past January. Lot 22, dog off leash. Lot 34, garage door paint 1 shade off regulation white. At first, people gasped. Then they laughed. It was absurd. These weren't crimes, they were nitpicks. And the more Karen read, the more ridiculous she sounded. Her binder, meant to terrify, became a comedy act. Laughter spread through the room, growing louder with each citation. Someone shouted, "Is this what you've been doing with your time?" Another added, "No wonder your lawn looks like a golf course, you've been spying on everyone else instead of living your life." Karen slammed the binder shut, face red with rage. "You don't understand," she screamed. "Rules are what keep us safe. Without me, this place will be chaos." But chaos had already arrived, and she was the cause. The board president finally stood, his voice firm. "Karen, you're done. This isn't a hearing. This isn't a debate. This is your removal, effective immediately. You have no authority here." The neighbors cheered, a sound of collective release. Years of resentment poured out in applause, whistles, even stomps on the floor. Karen looked around, eyes wild, realizing her power had evaporated completely. She tried one last threat. "You'll regret this. The county will bleed you dry, and I'll laugh when you come crawling back." But nobody crawled. They just turned their backs as she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. The next morning, the real fallout hit. Word spread that Karen had ignored the county's demand to pay her fines. In response, the county placed a lien on her property. Her pristine, overwatered palace of a home was now a financial time bomb. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks to whisper as a notice was taped to her front door: "Property under lien." The humiliation was complete. Karen, of course, didn't take it quietly. She retaliated by putting her house up for sale at a wildly inflated price, claiming it was the crown jewel of the neighborhood. But no buyers came. Realtors wouldn't touch it. Word of her antics had spread too far. Online listings mocked the house with sarcastic reviews. "Comes with free HOA drama. Water included, if you bring your own wrench." The final blow came 2 weeks later, when a county crew arrived with backhoes and drills. They tore up the street in front of Karen's house, disconnecting her illegal irrigation lines and installing tamper-proof meters. She screamed at them from her porch, calling them criminals, threatening lawsuits, but they ignored her. By the time they left, her lush lawn was reduced to a patchy mud pit. And then, just like that, she was gone. One morning, a moving truck appeared. By evening, the blinds were stripped, the porch bare, the house empty. No goodbyes, no explanations. Karen had fled her ruined kingdom, leaving behind a legacy of resentment, laughter, and cautionary tales. The neighborhood changed after that. People started planting gardens without fear of inspection. Kids rode bikes without being scolded for helmet infractions. The HOA, humbled by the fiasco, relaxed its grip. Meetings became about actual improvements, fixing sidewalks, organizing potlucks, instead of policing flower colors. For the first time in years, Crescent Lane felt like a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. As for me, I replaced the lock on my spigot and installed a small stone fountain in my front yard, its gentle trickle a reminder of the war we'd fought over water. Neighbors would stop to admire it, sometimes laughing at the absurdity of it all. "Remember when she called herself the savior of the block?" George once said, shaking his head. "Now she's just a cautionary tale."